In a modest garage at the edge of town, Joe Martinez had built a reputation for fixing anything with moving parts. From rusty bicycles to ancient washing machines, his skilled hands gave broken things a second chance at life. One rainy Tuesday morning, he noticed an elderly gentleman struggling with a wheelchair outside his shop. The wheels barely turned, and the frame was bent from years of use. Without hesitation, Joe beckoned him inside. For 2 hours, he worked, meticulously transforming the weathered chair into something that glided like new. The old man's eyes filled with tears as he rolled away smoothly, but Joe had already turned back to his work, unaware that this simple act of kindness would change his life forever. What happens when life decides to reward a good deed in the most unexpected way? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The old toolbox sat on Joe Martinez's workbench like a battle-worn soldier, its red paint chipped and faded from 3 decades of faithful service. It had been his father's before him, and every morning Joe's calloused fingers traced the dents and scratches as if reading a familiar story. Today was no different, as he arrived at Martinez Auto and General Repair just before sunrise, the way his father had taught him. The automare carried a hint of wood smoke from nearby chimneys as Joe unlocked the heavy padlock on the garage door. The mechanism's protest echoed through the empty parking lot. He'd been meaning to oil it for weeks now, but somehow other people's repairs always took precedence. The metal door groaned upward, revealing the shop that had been his second home since childhood. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered to life, illuminating a space that spoke more of history than prosperity. 3 service bays stretched before him, only one equipped with a modern lift. The others still used the old-fashioned hydraulic jacks his father had bought second-hand in '85. Against the walls, metal shelves sagged under the weight of parts, accumulated over decades. Manifolds, alternators, water pumps, each carefully salvaged from vehicles long since retired. The coffee maker, another inheritance from his father, sputtered to life, filling the air with the aroma that had marked the beginning of countless workdays. Joe pulled his thermos from his lunch bag, the same one Rosa had given him 5 Christmases ago, decorated with faded pictures of classic cars. "Buenos dias, hermanito." Rosa's voice carried through the open door, right on schedule. His sister arrived each morning to handle the books before heading to her main job at the local credit union. She carried a manila envelope tucked under one arm, probably more bills to sort through. "You're early," Joe noted, pouring coffee into 2 mugs, one bearing the shop's original logo from 1962. Rosa settled at the small desk in the corner, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "Quarter end coming up. Need to make sure everything's in order." She paused, shuffling through papers. Speaking of which, Joe raised a hand, focusing on his coffee. "Let me guess. Another letter from Western Auto Parts." 3 letters, actually. Rosa's tone carried the weight of concern she'd been trying to mask for months. "They're threatening to cut our credit line if we don't bring the account current by the end of the month." The words hung in the air like exhaust fumes on a windless day. Joe set his mug down and walked to the toolbox, running his fingers over its worn surface again. Inside, arranged with military precision, lay the tools his father had used to build. This business from nothing. Miguel Martinez had arrived in this town with these tools, a 10th-grade education, and an unflagging belief that honest work would always find its reward. "We'll figure something out," Joe said, more to his father's memory than to Rosa. "We always do." Rosa sighed, the sound of a woman who'd heard this optimism too many times before. "Joe, we need to talk about—" The rumble of an approaching vehicle cut her off. Through the open garage door, they watched Mrs. Thompson's ancient Buick struggle into the parking lot, the engine coughing like a lifetime smoker. "Later," Joe said, already reaching for his diagnostic scanner. "Mrs. Thompson's been having trouble with her timing belt." "She can't afford to pay full price," Rosa reminded him, though they both knew it was unnecessary. "Half the neighborhood couldn't afford full price, which was exactly why their books looked the way they did. Joe grabbed a rag to wipe his hands, though they both knew the grease stains were permanent by now. "Her grandson's in college," he said quietly. "First in the family. She needs that car to get to her second job." Rosa watched her brother walk out to greet their first customer of the day, her expression a mixture of pride and worry. On the wall, behind her desk, hung their father's first dollar, earned on this very spot. Next to it, a collection of thank you cards grew like a garden of gratitude. Hand-drawn pictures from children whose bikes Joe had fixed, heartfelt notes from seniors whose mobility scooters he'd restored, photographs of families standing beside cars that should have been junked but now purred like new. The morning sun streamed through the garage doors, catching dust motes in its rays. They danced around Joe as he bent over Mrs. Thompson's engine, his movements precise and gentle, like a surgeon at work. This was his element, solving problems, fixing what was broken, keeping the mechanical hearts of his community beating. Rosa turned back to her papers, but not before noticing how the sun had bleached the shop's sign over the years. Martinez, Auto and General Repair, was barely legible now, much like their chances of keeping the business afloat if something didn't change soon. But she knew better than to push the issue this morning. Joe had inherited more than just their father's toolbox. He'd inherited his stubborn belief that doing good work and helping people would somehow be enough. As she sorted through invoices, marked with payment plan and special discount, Rosa whispered a prayer to St. Christopher, patron saint of travelers. She prayed not just for the shop's survival, but for someone to help her brother see that sometimes accepting help was as noble as giving it. The wall behind Joe's workbench told a story that no accounting ledger ever could. Pinned carefully with thumbtacks, faded and new thank you notes created a tapestry of community gratitude. A crayon drawing showed a stick figure in blue coveralls beneath a rainbow. "Thank you for fixing my mum's car. Emily, age 7. Next to it, a weathered Polaroid captured an elderly couple standing beside their restored 1985 Oldsmobile, their smiles as bright as the car's polished chrome. Joe glanced at the wall as he finished up with Mrs. Thompson's Buick. The timing belt replacement had taken longer than expected. Rust had seized several bolts, requiring extra care to avoid, damaging the engine housing. He'd added a complimentary oil change after noticing the thick, dark fluid during his inspection. Mrs. Thompson had protested, but Joe insisted it was part of the service. "How much do I owe you, Joe?" Mrs. Thompson stood by the desk, her worn purse clutched tightly against her flowered dress. The worry lines around her eyes spoke of someone who counted every dollar twice. "Parts and 2 hours labor," Joe said, writing up the invoice. He quoted her half his normal rate, and they both pretended this wasn't their usual arrangement. "You can pay it over 3 months, no interest." Mrs. Thompson's eyes welled up. "You're too good to us, Joe, just like your father was." She reached into her purse and pulled out a plastic container. "I made you and Rosa some tamales, the way your mother taught me years ago." Before Joe could respond, the rumble of a diesel engine announced the arrival of Eddie Chen's delivery van. The local restaurant supplier had been a regular customer, since Joe diagnosed an electrical problem that 3 other shops had missed. Eddie's business depended on reliable transportation, and he never forgot that Joe had saved him thousands in potential spoiled inventory. "Joe!" Eddie called out, his round face creased with concern. "The van's making that noise again. I've got deliveries all afternoon." "Pull it into Bay 3, Joe replied, already reaching for his diagnostic tablet. "I'll take a look right now." Mrs. Thompson gathered her keys, patting Joe's arm as she passed. "I'll tell everyone at church about how you helped me," she said, though they both knew she'd been doing exactly that for years. The morning flowed into afternoon like oil into an engine. Smooth and purposeful. Joe moved from Eddie's van to Mr. Peterson's riding mower, then to young Tyler's first car, a hand-me-down Honda that burned more oil than gas. Each repair was more than just a transaction. It was another thread in the fabric of trust Joe had, woven through the community. Between jobs, he noticed Rosa adding another note to the wall. This one was from the local high school's robotics team. Joe had helped them restore an old engine for their demonstration project. The team had placed second in the state championships. "Remember when Dad started this wall?" Rosa asked, stepping back to admire the collection. "Said every thank you note was worth more than a paid invoice." Joe nodded, wiping his hands on a shop rag. He understood what really keeps a business. "Running?" "Speaking of running," Rosa began, but was interrupted by the arrival of Maria Gonzalez, pushing her daughter's stroller with one hand and pulling a red wagon with the other. "The wagon's wheel keeps sticking," Maria explained apologetically. "Isabella has her big race tomorrow." Joe smiled, remembering the soapbox derby posters he'd seen around town. "Bring it in. We'll make sure she has the fastest wagon in the competition." As he worked on the wagon's axle, Joe chatted with Isabella about her derby strategy. The 7-year-old's eyes shone with excitement as she described the course, her hands making swooping motions to demonstrate the turns. Her father had been laid off from the factory 6 months ago, but Joe knew better than to mention the no-charge policy to a proud parent in front of their child. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the garage doors when Joe finally straightened up from the wagon. "There you go, Isabella. Test it out." The little girl pulled her wagon in circles around the parking lot, her delighted laughter echoing off the building's walls. Maria hung back, twisting her hands. "Joe, about the payment. Your husband can help me reorganize my parts inventory when he has time," Joe said quietly. "That'll more than cover it." As Maria and Isabella left, their waves framed by the setting sun, Rosa emerged from the office with a stack of papers. "You know, Joe, if you charged even 3/4 of market rate, we wouldn't be in this situation." Joe picked up a wrench, turning it over in his hands. "And if Dad had charged market rate, half these people wouldn't have vehicles running today. Their kids wouldn't make it to school, they'd miss work." He gestured to the wall of thank you notes. "This is our real inventory, Rosa. This is what we're really building here." Rosa sighed, but her expression was soft. "You're just like him, you know. Always believing in people." "Someone has to," Joe replied, turning back to his workbench. But his eyes lingered on the wall of notes, each one a reminder that in this small corner of the world, kindness still had value that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. The next morning arrived with the same routine Joe had followed for 20 years. The coffee maker sputtered to life, the familiar aroma mixing with the ever-present scent of motor oil and rubber. He was halfway through his first cup when the sound reached him. The distinctive purr of finely tuned European engines, multiple vehicles approaching in formation. The noise grew louder, echoing off the surrounding buildings until it filled the small parking lot. Joe stepped out of his office just as the first vehicle rounded the corner. A midnight black Bentley Continental gleamed in the morning sun, followed by a silver Porsche Cayenne and a pearl-white Rolls-Royce Ghost. The procession moved with choreographed precision, forming a semicircle in front of his shop. For a moment, Joe thought he was still asleep, dreaming behind his desk after another late night of paperwork. But the coffee cup was warm in his hand, and Rosa's sharp intake of breath behind him confirmed the reality of the scene. The car's doors opened simultaneously, and 5 people emerged. They moved with the practiced confidence of those accustomed to commanding attention, their designer suits and leather briefcases marking them as clearly out of place in this working-class neighborhood. A tall woman in her 40s, wearing a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than Joe's monthly revenue, approached first. She held out a business card made of thick, cream-colored stock, the embossed letters catching the light. "Mr. Martinez, I'm Sarah Chen, CEO of Chen Global Industries. These are my siblings, William, Michael, Elizabeth, and James. We'd like to speak with you about our father." Joe accepted the card automatically, his mind struggling to process the connection. Then he remembered the elderly gentleman from yesterday, the wheelchair repair that had seemed so routine. "Your father?" He began, but Sarah Chen was already continuing. Yes, Thomas Chen, the man whose wheelchair you repaired yesterday. Her expression softened slightly. He called us all last night, quite insistent that we meet you. He was very moved by your kindness. William Chen, distinguished in his navy suit, stepped forward. Our father built Chen Global from nothing. Mr. Martinez. He retired 5 years ago, but he still serves as chairman emeritus. These days, he prefers to travel incognito, observing how people behave when they don't know his name. I didn't do anything special, Joe said, suddenly conscious of the grease under his fingernails. The chair needed fixing. That's what we do here. That's exactly why we're here, Elizabeth Chen interjected. She was the youngest of the siblings, but carried herself with the same self-assured grace. Father told us how you worked for 2 hours, refused payment, and treated him with dignity rather than pity. He said you reminded him of himself 40 years ago. Michael Chen, who had been studying the shop's interior with keen interest, joined the conversation. We've done some research, Mr. Martinez. Your reputation in this community is remarkable. The impact you've had on local families, the opportunities you've created through your payment plans and trade arrangements. It's exactly the kind of social entrepreneurship our foundation supports. Foundation? Rosa had moved to stand beside her brother, her accounting ledger clutched protectively against her chest. James Chen, who had remained quietly observant until now, produced a leather portfolio. The Chen Family Foundation focuses on community development through sustainable business practices. We're interested in proposing a partnership. Joe's mind raced. The weight of the business card in his hand seemed to grow with each passing moment. Yesterday, he had simply helped an elderly man regain his mobility. Now that simple act had brought 5 corporate executives to his doorstep. What kind of partnership? He asked carefully, his father's voice in his head reminding him that not all that glitters is gold. Sarah Chen smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through her professional demeanor. We'd like to invest in your vision, Mr. Martinez. Help you expand your operation, create a proper community auto center, training programs for young mechanics, modern equipment, a scholarship fund for automotive education. But she held up a hand as if sensing his hesitation. With you maintaining complete operational control. Your values, your methods, just with the resources to reach more people. The siblings watched him expectantly while Rosa's hand found his arm, squeezing gently. Through the open garage door, Joe could see Mrs. Thompson's Buick parked across the street, where she was probably telling her friend Maria about his help with the timing belt. The wall of thank you notes seemed to whisper behind him, each one a testament to what his father had built, what Joe had maintained through sheer determination and faith in people. Why? He asked finally. There must be hundreds of garages you could invest in, bigger operations, better locations. Because, William Chen said quietly, our father didn't build his company through metrics and market analysis. He built it by recognizing genuine integrity when he saw it. Yesterday, you didn't see a wealthy CEO. You saw a human being who needed help, and you helped without hesitation or expectation. Elizabeth withdrew a document from her briefcase. We'd like to show you the preliminary proposal. No pressure, no immediate decisions required. Just an opportunity to discuss how we might help you help more people. Joe looked at Rosa, saw the hope and concern warring in her eyes. He thought of his father's toolbox, the generations of trust it represented. Then he looked at the business card in his hand, elegant in its simplicity, carrying the weight of possibility. That evening, after the last customer had gone and the shadows grew long across the empty service bays, Joe sat at his father's old desk, staring at 2 pieces of paper. On the left lay the mortgage notice that had arrived that morning. It's red. Final warning stamp, a stark reminder of their financial reality. On the right, Sarah Chen's business card caught the fading light, its embossed letters promising a future he'd never dared to imagine. You haven't touched your dinner, Rosa said softly, setting down 2 fresh cups of coffee. she'd brought back. Itamales from their mother's house, but they sat untouched, wrapped in their corn husks like forgotten gifts. Joe picked up the mortgage notice, his calloused fingers leaving slight smudges on the crisp paper. "Did you know we're 3 months behind?" Rosa nodded, pulling up the spare chair. "I've been juggling the books, paying just enough to keep the utilities on and the parts suppliers delivering. But Joe—" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "We can't keep going like this." The evening air carried the distant sound of traffic from the highway, a reminder of the world beyond their small corner of it. Joe opened his father's bottom desk drawer, withdrawing a worn leather journal. Its pages contained Miguel Martinez's careful handwriting, documenting every loan he'd ever paid off, every milestone the shop had reached. "What would Dad do?" Joe asked, though they both knew it wasn't really a question. Their father's voice seemed to echo in the quiet shop. "A man's word is his bond, hijo. His reputation is his legacy." Rosa reached across the desk and gently took the journal. "Dad also said something else, remember? The night before he passed?" She flipped through the pages until she found what she was looking for, reading aloud. "Sometimes the bravest thing a captain can do is accept help to save his ship." Joe stood up, walking to the wall of thank-you notes. A new one had appeared today. A simple card from Isabella's father, thanking Joe for fixing his daughter's wagon and offering his help with the inventory. "What if they change everything, Rosa? What if we lose what makes this place special?" "Mean what makes you special?" Rosa corrected gently. "Joe, I've been looking into the Chen family. Their foundation has a track record of community investment. They've never once stripped a business of its character. If anything, they amplify what's already working." She joined him at the wall, pointing to a photograph of old Mr. Peterson standing proudly beside his restored 1957 Chevy. "Remember how many hours you spent on that car? How many parts you had to track down? Imagine being able to do that for more people, to teach others how to do it." Joe touched the photograph, remembering. Peterson had insisted on paying full price. But Joe had known the old man was living on Social Security. They'd worked out a deal. Peterson would teach local kids about classic car maintenance every Saturday for a year. Those sessions had become a neighborhood institution. The Chens talked about training programs, Joe said slowly. Scholarships for kids who want to learn the trade. Rosa pulled another paper from her folder. She'd clearly been preparing for this conversation. It was a printout of news articles about Chen Foundation projects, community centers in Detroit, youth programs in Chicago, small business initiatives that had transformed struggling neighborhoods. "They're not Western Auto parts," she said, referring to the corporate chain that had tried to buy them out 3 years ago. "They're not looking to turn this into another soulless service center. They see what you've built here, what Dad started. They want to help it grow." Joe returned to the desk, picking up Sarah Chen's business card again. In the fading light, he could make out a detail he'd missed earlier, the foundation's motto in small text along the bottom, "Preserving values, empowering communities." A memory surfaced, his father's voice again, but different this time. Joe had been 16, frustrated after failing to fix a particularly challenging transmission. Miguel had sat him down right here, in this office. "Sometimes, hijo, the hardest part isn't the fixing. It's knowing when you need different tools than the ones in your box." The mortgage notice seemed to glare at him from the desk. Next month's property tax payment loomed. The lift in Bay 2 needed repairs they couldn't afford. Mrs. Thompson's grandson would be looking for an internship soon, but Joe couldn't pay him anything close to what he deserved. "What if—" Joe began, then stopped, gathering his thoughts. "What if we meet with them again, just to hear the full proposal?" Rosa's smile was small but hopeful. "I think that would make Dad proud. Not because you're giving up, but because you're putting the community first, just like he taught us." Joe nodded slowly, reaching for the phone. As he dialed the number on the business card, he glanced at his father's toolbox, still sitting faithfully on his workbench. The tools inside had built more than just a business. They'd built trust, community, hope. Maybe it was time to add some new tools to the box. The blueprint spread across Joe's workbench like a dream made manifest on paper. Sarah Chen stood beside him, using a laser pointer to highlight different sections of the proposed community auto center. The familiar outlines of his father's shop formed the heart of the design, but new wings extended outward like welcoming arms. "We want to preserve the original structure," Sarah explained, her voice carrying the same quiet authority as her father's had. "It's not just about sentimentality. This building has history, character. People trust this place." William Chen stepped forward, pointing to a large area marked Training Center. "This is where we see the magic happening, Mr. Martinez." 5. Fully equipped service bays, state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment, and space for classroom instruction. Joe's finger traced the outline of his father's original garage. The blueprint preserved every bay, every corner where memories had been made. Even the ancient coffee maker had its designated spot, marked with a small note, "Historic equipment. Preserve." The documentation mentioned scholarships, Rosa said, adjusting her reading glasses as she studied the financial projections spread beside the blueprint. Elizabeth Chen nodded, pulling up a presentation on her tablet. "We're proposing a dual-track program. Track 1, full scholarships for promising students from low-income backgrounds. Track 2, subsidized training for working adults looking to change careers. Both tracks include paid apprenticeships." "And the current payment plans?" Joe asked, thinking of Mrs. Thompson and countless others who depended on his flexible arrangements. "The special rates for seniors and struggling families." Michael Chen smiled, handing Joe another document. "We want to formalize them. Create a proper community assistance program backed by foundation funds. No more dipping into your personal savings to cover parts costs." Joe looked up sharply. He'd never told anyone about using his savings to help customers in need. Michael raised his hands in acknowledgement. "We did our homework, Mr. Martinez. That's why we're here. You've been running an informal community support system on sheer willpower and thin margins. We want to give it a proper structure and sustainable funding." James Chen, who had been quietly observing, moved to the blueprint's corner where a small garden was sketched. "This area here, we thought it could be a tribute to your father, a place where people can sit while they wait for their vehicles. Maybe display some of those thank you notes in a proper gallery." The afternoon light filtered through the garage windows, casting long shadows across the blueprint. Joe could almost see it. Young apprentices working alongside experienced mechanics. Classrooms filled with eager students. Families getting the help they needed, without him having to choose between paying bills and helping neighbors. "The foundation's investment would cover everything?" Rosa asked, her accountant's mind focusing on the practical details. Sarah nodded. "Construction, equipment, initial staffing, scholarship funds, all of it. We're also proposing an endowment to ensure long-term sustainability." She paused, making sure she had Joe's full attention. "But we have one non-negotiable condition." Joe tensed, waiting for the other shoe to drop. This was usually when corporate types revealed their true intentions. "You have to remain in charge," Sarah said simply. "Full operational control, final say on all programs and policies. We'll provide resources and administrative support, but the spirit of this place, that has to stay pure. That's what our father insisted on." William pulled out a photo Joe hadn't seen before. Thomas Chen standing beside his wheelchair in what looked like a luxurious study. The elderly man was smiling, pointing to something off camera. "This was taken last night," William explained. "He's showing his grandchildren your shop's website, telling them about how you treated him, how it reminded him of his own early days fixing machines in Taiwan." Joe studied the photo, remembering the quiet dignity of the man he'd helped, never suspecting he was a business legend. "Your father built something amazing," he said quietly. "Why does he care so much about my little shop?" Elizabeth stepped closer, her expression earnest. "Because he recognizes what you've really built here, Mr. Martinez. It's not just a repair shop, it's a community anchor, a place where people find help, hope, and dignity. He says that's exactly how he started, and he wants to make sure places like this don't disappear. Joe looked around his shop, at the worn floors that had supported 3 generations of mechanics, at the wall of thank you notes that told the real story of his father's legacy, at Rosa's hopeful expression as she reviewed the financial projections. The blueprint seemed to glow in the afternoon light, not just showing a building's future, but a community's possibility. Every detail honored the past while reaching for tomorrow. It was exactly what his father would have drawn if he'd had the resources to dream this big. The flyer appeared on Joe's workbench early Monday morning, its glossy surface garish against the worn wood. "Stop the corporate takeover of our neighborhood!" screamed red letters above a photo of his shop, crudely edited to show a towering corporate facility crushing small houses beneath it. At the bottom, smaller text urged, "Join the Community Protection Alliance meeting this Thursday. Save our local businesses from big money interests." Joe might have laughed at the melodramatic imagery if he hadn't recognized the logo in the corner, Western Auto Parts. The same company that had tried to buy him out 3 years ago, offering to turn his father's legacy into another franchise. Location: "They're already putting these up all over town," Rosa said, dropping a stack of identical flyers on the desk. "I counted 15 just on my way to work. Someone even stuck them on our customers' windshields." Before Joe could respond, the shop phone rang. It was Mrs. Thompson, her voice tight with concern. "Joe, dear, I just wanted to make sure you're okay. My bridge club is all talking about how some big corporation is forcing you out of business." He spent the next 20 minutes reassuring her, explaining about the Chen Foundation's community-focused plan. But as soon as he hung up, another call came in, then another. By mid-morning, his regular customers were stopping by in person, each carrying versions of the same worried questions. Eddie Chen, no relation to Thomas Chen, parked his delivery van in the lot around lunchtime, looking troubled. "Joe, man, you know I trust you. But the guys at the restaurant supply store were saying this new development's going to drive up all the rents in the area, force out small businesses like mine." Joe wiped his hands on a shop rag, frustration building. "Eddie, that's not—" I know," Eddie interrupted, holding up his hands. "You wouldn't do that to us. But these flyers, they've got people scared. There's talk about organizing protests, maybe even boycotting shops that support the development." Through the open garage door, Joe could see a group of people gathering across the street, some holding signs he couldn't quite read. Rosa appeared at his elbow, holding her tablet. "It's worse online," she said quietly, showing him a local Facebook group where the flyer had spawned hundreds of angry comments. "Someone's spreading rumors that we're going to demolish half the block, that the training program is just a cover for bringing in outside workers." The bell above the door chimed as William Peterson hobbled in, clutching one of the flyers in his gnarled hands. The old man had been bringing his cars to Miguel Martinez for 40 years, and to Joe for 20 more after that. "Tell me straight." "Joe," Peterson said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of trust, "are they turning this place into one of them soulless corporate shops?" Joe led Peterson to the office, where the Chen Foundation's blueprint still lay on his desk. As he explained the real plan, the preserved historic building, the community programs, the scholarship opportunities, he could see the tension leaving the old man's shoulders. "Huh," Peterson grunted, studying the garden area dedicated to Miguel Martinez's memory. "Sounds more like what your dad would have wanted than what these flyers are saying." "Would you tell people that?" Rosa asked hopefully. "Maybe at your classic car club?" Peterson nodded slowly. "Reckon I could. Got a meeting tonight, matter of fact. Bunch of old-timers who remember what your daddy did for this community." But as Peterson left, Joe noticed more people gathering across the street. Someone had brought a megaphone. Through the shop windows, fragments of angry speeches drifted in. "Corporate greed. Destroying neighborhood character. Selling out." Rosa touched his arm gently. "We need to do something, Joe. If this keeps spreading—" The phone rang again. This time it was Sarah Chen. "We've seen the flyers," she said without preamble. "Our PR team can help manage this, but—" She paused. "It needs to come from you, Mr. Martinez. The community trusts your voice, not ours." Joe looked at the wall of thank you notes, each one representing a family he'd helped, a relationship built on trust. Then his eyes fell on a newer addition, a simple card from Thomas Chen, delivered that morning. Inside, in careful handwriting, was a quote, "The truth fears no questions." "Get me a meeting," Joe said finally. "Not with protesters or online groups. I want to talk to my customers. All of them. The real people who've trusted this shop for generations." He picked up one of the flyers, its exaggerated imagery now seeming almost desperate. Western Auto Parts might have money and marketing teams, but they didn't have 40 years of trust. They didn't have a wall full of thank you notes. They didn't have his father's legacy. "And Rosa?" he added, a plan forming in his mind. "Get me every receipt, every payment plan, every trade arrangement we've made in the last 20 years. It's time to show people what community business really looks like." Outside, the crowd had grown larger, their chants echoing off the building's old brick walls. But inside, surrounded by the tools and memories of 3 generations of service, Joe stood firm. He'd faced down corporate buyouts and economic downturns. He'd kept his father's dream alive through recessions and repairs that cost more than they earned. This was different. This wasn't just about saving his shop anymore. It was about growing it the right way, about building something that would serve the community long after he was gone. And for that, he'd fight with the most powerful tools he had: truth, trust, and 40 years of receipts marked "payment plan approved." The ceremonial golden shovel caught the morning sun, its polished surface reflecting the crowd gathered in the Martinez Auto and General Repair parking lot. Joe held it awkwardly, more comfortable with wrenches than ceremonial tools. Beside him, Thomas Chen sat in his newly restored wheelchair, beaming like a proud father at the assembled community members. "3 generations ago," Joe began, his voice carrying across the unexpected silence, "my grandfather crossed the border with nothing but hope and a few tools. My father turned those tools into this shop. Today, we're not just breaking ground on a building. We're breaking ground on a dream that started with a man who believed that fixing things was about more than just machines." The crowd had transformed remarkably from the angry protesters of 2 weeks ago. Joe's community meeting had changed everything. He'd spread 40 years of receipts across the shop floor, thousands of payment plans, trades for services, arrangements that proved this business had always put people before profits. Then he'd invited Thomas Chen to tell his own story of starting with nothing but technical skills and a belief in helping others. Now, Mrs. Thompson stood in the front row, dabbing, her eyes with a handkerchief. Behind her, Eddie Chen's delivery van was parked prominently, sporting a new banner, "Proud supporter of the Martinez Community Auto Center." The local high school's robotics team had set up a display of their award-winning project, eager to show younger kids what they might learn in the new training facility. "The shovel, Joe," Rosa whispered, nudging him. "Right, the ceremonial part." He stepped forward, positioning the golden shovel over the marked spot. Thomas Chen's wheelchair rolled up beside him. "May I?" the elderly businessman asked, placing his weathered hands next to Joe's on the shovel's handle. Together, they pushed the blade into the earth, turning over the first symbolic scoop of soil. Applause erupted, led by the Chen siblings, who stood respectfully in the background, letting this moment belong to the community. Sarah caught Joe's eye and nodded approvingly. They'd worked hard to get here, to turn opposition into understanding. William Peterson's classic car club had parked their restored vehicles in a gleaming row along the street, each one a testament to the kind of craftsmanship the new center would teach. Peterson himself hobbled forward after the shovel ceremony, presenting Joe with something wrapped in old shop cloths. "Found this in my garage," the old man said gruffly. "Think it belongs here now." Joe unwrapped the bundle to find an original, signed from his father's first shop, Hand-painted, the letters slightly crooked but full of heart. Martinez Auto Repair. Everyone welcome. Dad painted this himself, Joe said softly, remembering watching Miguel Martinez carefully form each letter, insisting that everyone welcome be larger than his own name. Going to hang it in the new building? Peterson asked. Right over the main entrance, Joe promised, already picturing it above the modern glass doors shown in the blueprint, a bridge between past and future. The construction crew was already setting up their equipment, ready to begin work as soon as the ceremony ended. The plan was carefully phased. The new wings would be built first, allowing the original shop to continue operating. Only then would the historic building be carefully renovated, preserving its character while updating its capabilities. Rosa had organized refreshments, and the crowd moved toward tables set up in the shade. Joe noticed Isabella, the young soap, box derby champion, explaining to a group of wide-eyed children how she'd learned about wheels and axles in his shop. Her father, now employed as a construction supervisor for the project, stood nearby, pride evident in his stance. Your father would be proud, Thomas Chen said quietly, still sitting beside Joe. Not just of the expansion, but of how you handled the resistance. You showed them what community really means. Joe nodded, thinking of the tense weeks after the flyers appeared. He'd spent evenings visiting longtime customers, bringing records of their history together, showing them the real plans. The protest. Organizers had expected corporate doublespeak. Instead, they got 40 years of receipts, marked with payment plans, trades, and notes about helping families in need. I learned that from him, Joe replied. He always said the books tell the real story of a business, not the profit margins, but the people behind every transaction. The construction foreman approached, respectfully waiting for a break in the conversation. Mr. Martinez, we're ready to begin the actual work whenever you give the word. Joe looked at the golden shovel, now propped against his father's old toolbox. From symbol to reality. The moment of truth. One thing first, he said, walking to his workshop. He emerged with his father's oldest wrench, the one Miguel Martinez had carried across the border. Kneeling at the spot where they'd turned the earth, he carefully buried it just beneath the surface. For luck? Thomas Chen asked, understanding in his eyes. For foundation, Joe replied. Everything we build here will rest on what came before. He straightened up, brushing dirt from his hands, and nodded to the foreman. Let's begin. The sound of machinery starting up filled the air, but it couldn't drown out the conversations and laughter of the gathered community. Joe watched as Sarah Chen showed a group of teenagers the training center plans, as Rosa explained the scholarship program to eager parents. As his customers, his extended family, began to see the future taking shape. The golden shovel had done its ceremonial duty, but Joe knew the real work was just beginning. Like every repair job he'd ever tackled, it would take time, patience, and faith in the end result. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of it all on his shoulders alone. He had a community behind him, a legacy beneath him, and a future rising before him, as bright as that shovel in the morning sun. The student application form trembled slightly in Marcus Johnson's hands as he stood in Joe's office. Just 17, with oil-stained fingers and earnest eyes, he represented everything the new training program was meant to serve. But he also represented Joe's biggest challenge yet. Sir, I know my grades aren't the best, Marcus said, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. But I've been fixing cars with my uncle since I was 12. I understand machines. Joe studied the application. Marcus's GPA was well below the Foundation's recommended threshold, but his practical experience section filled 2 extra pages. More importantly, Joe recognized the look in the boy's eyes, the same one he'd seen in the mirror 40 years ago when his father first handed him a wrench. The standardized requirements? Joe began, then stopped, remembering his conversation with Sarah Chen yesterday. The guidelines are just that, guidelines, she had said, reviewing the first batch of applications. We trust your judgment, Mr. Martinez. You know what makes a good mechanic better than any test score. Rosa appeared in the doorway carrying A stack of similar applications. We have 27 so far, she reported, and 3 calls this morning about the adult retraining program. The construction noise from outside provided a constant reminder of the changes underway. The new wing was taking shape rapidly, its modern lines a striking contrast to the weathered brick of the original shop. Through the window, Joe could see Eddie Chen's nephew installing the latest diagnostic equipment in what would soon be the main training bay. "Show me what you can do," Joe said to Marcus, standing up. He led the teenager to a workbench where an old carburetor lay in pieces. "Tell me what you see." For the next 30 minutes, Joe listened as Marcus detailed not just the carburetor's problems, but 3 different ways to fix them, including one creative solution involving a modified fuel injection system. The boy's hands moved as he talked, sketching invisible diagrams in the air. "You start Monday," Joe decided, 7 a.m. sharp. "And Marcus?" He waited until he had the boy's full attention. "I expect you to spend 2 hours after training each day. With our tutor, that GPA is going to improve." The smile that broke across Marcus's face made Joe's decision feel right, guidelines or no guidelines. After the boy left, practically floating out the door, Rosa gave her brother a knowing look. "You're going to have to modify the acceptance criteria," she said, but her tone was approving. "No," Joe replied, picking up the application form that would become the first of many success stories. "We're going to create new ones. Grades matter, but so does heart. Dad taught us that." The rest of the day brought a parade of challenges that tested Joe's ability to balance growth with tradition. Mrs. Thompson arrived for her regular oil change, looking bewildered by the construction barriers and new equipment. Joe made sure to service her car himself in the original bay, with the same careful attention he always had. "Things are changing," she observed, watching a group of contractors install computer terminals along one wall. "Some things never will," Joe assured her, pointing to the wall of thank you notes, now carefully preserved behind glass, but still growing. "Your payment plan stays exactly the same." By late afternoon, Joe faced his biggest challenge yet, hiring decisions for the expanded operation. The Chen Foundation had approved funding for 3 full-time instructors, 2 service managers, and an administrative staff. The stack of resumes on his desk included certified master mechanics from prestigious shops across the country. "The salary packages are competitive," Sarah Chen had assured him. "You'll be able to attract top talent." But as Joe reviewed the applications, he kept thinking about Eddie Chen's nephew, who'd learned mechanics helping in his uncle's delivery business, about Isabella's father, who'd shown natural leadership skills managing the construction crew, about the retired master mechanic from the Air Force Base who'd been helping local kids with their cars for years. Rosa found him still at his desk well after closing, surrounded by 2 piles of resumes. "You're not following the Foundation's hiring recommendations either, are you?" she asked, seeing the smaller pile of selected candidates. Joe handed her the top resume, the Air Force mechanic. "He doesn't have the fancy certifications they suggested, but he's got 20 years of teaching experience, even if it wasn't in a formal classroom, and he knows our community." Rosa sat down, picking up another resume. "Maria Gonzalez, for administrative staff." "She's been managing scheduling for 3 different parent-teacher organizations," Joe explained. "Knows every family in the neighborhood, been taking night classes in business administration." The Foundation wanted someone with a business degree. They wanted someone who could make this place run smoothly, Joe corrected. "Maria's been doing that for years, just without the title." He stood up, walking to the window. The setting. Sun caught the new steel beams of the training center, making them glow like gold. Below, Marcus Johnson had returned, just standing on the sidewalk, staring at the building with undisguised hope. "We're not just building a business," Joe said softly. "We're building a community. That takes more than degrees and certifications. It takes people who understand what that means." Rosa joined him at the window, seeing what her brother saw, not just a modern training facility rising from the ground, but a dream taking shape, built on 40 years of trust and a lifetime of lessons about what really matters in building something that lasts. The newspaper landed on Joe's desk with a thud that seemed to echo through the newly renovated office. The headline glared up at him. Favoritism allegations shadow Martinez Auto Center. Community members claim training program serves selected families while excluding others. Rosa stood in the doorway, her usual composed expression cracked with worry. It's all over social media. Channel 7 wants an interview. The Chamber of Commerce is calling for an investigation into the foundation's funding. Joe picked up the paper, scanning the article that threatened to unravel everything they'd built. The reporter had interviewed several local residents who claimed the student selection process favored certain families, suggesting that personal connections mattered more than qualifications. They'd even dug up Marcus Johnson's below-standard GPA, presenting it as evidence of compromised standards. There's more, Rosa said quietly, placing her tablet on the desk. The local community forum was ablaze with accusations. Someone had posted a list of the first training cohort, highlighting family connections. Marcus's uncle, who occasionally helped at the shop, Maria Gonzalez's nephew, Eddie Chen's cousin. The door chimed, and Sarah Chen strode in, her usual corporate calm slightly ruffled. "We need to get ahead of this," she said without preamble. "The Foundation's board is concerned. They're not used to this kind of publicity." Joe was about to respond when he heard raised voices from the shop floor. Through the office window he saw two men arguing near the new diagnostic station. One was Marcus Johnson's father. The other he recognized as James Weber, whose son's application had been waitlisted. "Your kid barely passes math," Weber was saying, his voice carrying clearly. "Mine's got a 4.0, but he can't get in because we don't have history here." Before Joe could intervene, William Chen appeared in the doorway holding a stack of papers. "It's not just the local press anymore. The story's being picked up by regional news. They're painting it as another case of insider privilege, disguised as community development." Joe stood up slowly, his hand automatically reaching for his father's old wrench that now hung mounted on the wall. The worn metal had always helped him think clearly in tough situations. Where did they get the student information? Rosa wondered aloud, scrolling through the online comments. Those records were supposed to be confidential. "Check the byline," Sarah said grimly. "The reporter's brother works for Western Auto Parts, the same company that tried to buy you out. They've been waiting for something like this." Joe walked to the window overlooking the shop floor. The argument had drawn attention. A small crowd was gathering. Through the main entrance, he could see a news van pulling into the parking lot. "We should release a statement," Sarah continued. "Explain the selection criteria, emphasize the Foundation's commitment to transparency." "No," Joe interrupted, still watching the scene below. Marcus Johnson had arrived for his training shift, but was standing frozen at the entrance, facing the hostile stares of people who'd read the morning paper. The boy's shoulders were slumped, his usual confidence shattered. "No?" Sarah asked. Surprised, "Mr. Martinez, we need to manage this narrative before what?" Joe turned to face them. "Before people believe we're exactly what they feared? Another top-down project that talks about community but serves insiders." He picked up Marcus's application from his desk drawer, along with a thick folder labeled Candidate Evaluations. "You want transparency? Let's give them real transparency." Rosa recognized the look in her brother's eyes. "Joe, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time for another community meeting, but not with press releases and corporate statements." He gestured to the filing cabinet where they kept every application, every evaluation, every decision document, with every single piece of paper that shows how and why we chose each student. Sarah Chen frowned. "That's highly irregular. The Foundation's protocols need to adapt," Joe finished. "Just like I did. Just like this whole project has." He walked to his desk, pressing the intercom button. "Maria, call every applicant's family, Accepted, waitlisted, rejected, everyone? Meeting tonight at 7 p.m. Tell them we're opening every file, answering every question. The foundation won't approve, William began, but his sister cut him off. Yes, they will, Sarah said, slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. Because this is exactly why we chose to work with Mr. Martinez in the first place. He understands something we don't about real community trust. Joe was already pulling files, stacking them on the conference table. Rosa, get me the receipts. All of them. Every payment plan, every trade arrangement, every community service hour, logged by these families over the years. The ones that proved our commitment last time, Rosa nodded, moving to the archives. And get me Marcus, Joe added. Tell him to bring his carburetor project, the one he redesigned last week. The news van's lights were now visible through the window and more reporters were arriving. The crowd in the parking lot had grown, divided between supporters and critics. Joe could see Mrs. Thompson's car pulling in, followed by William Peterson's classic Chevy. You're going to let them make their case, Sarah realized. Not just defend our choices, but show why they were right. No, Joe corrected, picking up the newspaper with its damaging headline. I'm going to show them what community really means, how it's built on more than test scores and formal qualifications, how it grows through generations of trust and mutual support. He looked out at the gathering crowd, at the mixing of old customers and new applicants, of supporters and skeptics. And then I'm going to do what my father always did when people doubted his methods. What's that? William Chen asked. Joe smiled, remembering Miguel Martinez's favorite saying, I'm going to hand them a wrench and let them see for themselves. The original shop sign, with its faded letters declaring Martinez Auto Repair, everyone welcome, stood propped on an easel at the front of the packed meeting room. Joe had positioned it deliberately, letting its weathered honesty set the tone. For what was about to happen, every folding chair was filled. People stood along the walls, spilled out into the hallway. News cameras huddled in the back, their red lights glowing like watchful eyes. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a wrench. James Weber sat in the front row, arms crossed, his son's rejected application clutched in one hand. Behind him, Marcus Johnson and his family kept their eyes fixed on the floor, feeling the weight of the morning's newspaper article. Joe stepped forward, his father's worn ledger in his hands. No PowerPoint presentations, no prepared statements, just 40 years of truth written in ink and grease stains. This book, he began, his voice carrying to the back of the room, has every repair, every payment plan, every trade of service this shop has done since 1984. Mr. Weber, he looked directly at the angry father, your brother's transmission repair is in here. The one we did for labor cost only when he lost his job in '95. Weber's crossed arms loosened slightly. Joe continued, opening the ledger to a marked page. Mrs. Thompson's timing belt from last month. Marcus Johnson's uncle helping rebuild engines for our senior discount program. The Gonzalez family organizing our Christmas tool drive for young mechanics. He looked up, meeting the room's gaze. This isn't about favoritism. It's about community. About people who've been fixing more than just cars in this neighborhood for generations. He nodded to Marcus, who nervously stood up carrying his modified carburetor project. Test scores matter, Joe acknowledged. But so does this. Innovation, dedication, the kind of understanding that comes from growing up with your hands in an engine. Marcus redesigned this system to run 30% more efficiently. That's the kind of thinking we need. Sarah Chen stepped forward then, adding her corporate authority to Joe's community credibility. The Foundation's commitment is to nurturing real talent wherever we find it. Sometimes that talent shows up in GPAs. Sometimes it shows up in a teenager who can redesign fuel systems in his spare time. The room had grown quieter, the hostile energy shifting to something more thoughtful. Joe opened another ledger, This one newer, containing the training program's selection criteria. Every decision is documented, every evaluation transparent. But we're not just building mechanics. Here, we're building a community that will sustain itself long after the foundation's investment is spent. From the back of the room, William Peterson's voice rang out. Like your daddy did, Joe. He always said a good mechanic fixes more than just cars. The mood in the room shifted palpably. Old-timers began sharing stories of Miguel Martinez's unconventional payment plans, of lessons learned in these bays, of a shop that had always put people before profits. As the meeting wound down, James Weber approached Joe, his son trailing. Behind him, "I didn't know," he said quietly, "about what you did for my brother back then." Joe handed him the carburetor Marcus had modified. "Your son's good with numbers. Maybe he and Marcus could work together. One's got the theory, one's got the hands-on. Together," he smiled. "Well, that's what community looks like." The news cameras captured it all. Not the scandal they'd expected, but a story of something deeper, of ledgers filled with human kindness, of test scores balanced against real-world wisdom, of a community learning, once again, to trust in something bigger than headlines. The first graduate certificate hung framed in the new training center's entrance hall, its crisp lettering and official seals catching the morning light. But it was the handwritten note beneath it that drew everyone's attention. To Mr. Martinez. "Thank you for teaching me that being a mechanic means being part of something bigger. Marcus Johnson, first graduate." 3 months had passed since the community meeting that had turned criticism into understanding. Now, on a bright Saturday morning, the training center hummed with activity. In Bay 1, Marcus was working alongside James Weber's son David. Their former rivalry transformed into an effective partnership. Marcus's hands-on intuition complemented David's theoretical knowledge perfectly. "See how the diagnostic readings match what I was feeling in the engine," Marcus was saying as David tracked the computer data. "That's why we need both, the numbers and the touch." Joe watched from the doorway, remembering his father's words about how the best repairs happened when mind and hands worked together. The controversy had forced them to refine their program in unexpected ways. Now each student was paired with a counterpart whose strengths complemented their weaknesses, creating teams that consistently outperformed traditional training methods. The local paper had run a new story last week, this time celebrating the program's innovative approach. "Martinez method combines traditional skills with modern technology," the headline read. Western Auto Parts' attempt to discredit them had backfired, drawing national attention to their unique community-based training model. Sarah Chen appeared beside him, watching the students work. "The Foundation's board is impressed," she said, quietly. "They're talking about using this as a model for other communities. They're calling it the Martinez Standard." Joe smiled, thinking of his father's simple philosophy about fixing things the right way, no matter what anyone else thought. Now that philosophy was shaping the future of technical education. In Bay 2, Mrs. Thompson's granddaughter was completing her certification in electric vehicle systems, preparing for the changing automotive landscape. The scholarship program had expanded, now including a special track for senior citizens wanting to understand their modern vehicles. "It's not just about training mechanics anymore," Rosa observed, joining them with the latest enrollment statistics. "It's about connecting generations, preserving knowledge while embracing change." The sound of laughter drew their attention to the community gathering space, where William Peterson was holding court with a group of young apprentices, sharing stories about carburetors and distributors that most of them would never work on, but needed to understand to appreciate how far automotive technology had come. Joe touched the framed certificate gently. Marcus's graduation ceremony had been attended by the entire neighborhood, including James Weber, who had stood and applauded the loudest. The boy who barely passed math had already received job offers from 3 major manufacturers, but had chosen to stay on as an instructor's assistant, helping other young mechanics find their way. "Your father would be proud," Mrs. Thompson said, pausing on her way to her regular coffee club meeting in the new community space. "Not just of what you built, but of how you fought for it." Joe nodded, watching as Marcus and David solved another diagnostic puzzle together, their different approaches creating something better than either could have achieved alone. The crisis hadn't weakened their program, it had revealed its true strength. In proving themselves to the community, they had discovered who they really were. The certificate caught the light again, its gleam promising many more to come. But it was the handwritten note that truly captured what they were building here. Not just a training center, but a place where being a mechanic meant being part of something bigger, something that would keep running long after the last wrench was turned. The wheelchair sat in a place of honor in the training center's main hall, restored to a mirror shine, but bearing every dent and mark of its history. A small plaque beneath it read, "Where it all began, the wheelchair that sparked a dream." Next to it, photographs showed the journey from that rainy morning to today's celebration. Thomas Chen sat in a new modern wheelchair, beaming as he watched the graduation ceremony of the program's first full class. 25 students of all ages stood proud in their clean uniforms, each wearing a pin that combined the Martinez Auto logo with the Chen Foundation emblem. "I knew that morning," he whispered to Joe, "when you didn't even ask my name before." "Helping, just saw someone who needed their wheels fixed." Joe smiled, remembering how unaware he'd been that his simple act of kindness would transform so many lives. The graduates before them represented every facet of their community. Young students like Marcus, who'd found their calling, mid-career adults retraining for new opportunities, even a grandmother who decided it was finally time to learn what made her car tick. Rosa stepped up to the podium, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium. "Today marks not just a graduation, but a fulfillment of a promise that began 3 generations ago, when Miguel Martinez first opened his shop with a simple belief that fixing things means fixing lives." The audience stirred as she gestured to the wall behind her, where the original "Everyone Welcome" sign hung alongside photographs of every graduate's journey. Each image told a story. Marcus and David working together on their first hybrid engine diagnostic, Mrs. Thompson's granddaughter teaching seniors about modern car systems, William Peterson sharing his classic car wisdom with wide-eyed apprentices. "But perhaps," Rosa continued, "the most important lesson we've learned is that true community isn't built on buildings or programs alone. It's built on trust, on seeing potential where others might not look, on believing that everyone has something valuable to contribute." From his seat, Thomas Chen nodded slowly, his eyes moving from the preserved wheelchair to the faces of his own children seated nearby. The Chen siblings had learned as much from this project as any student, about how real change happens not through corporate directives, but through genuine human connection. After the ceremony, as families celebrated and photos were taken, Joe found himself standing beside the old wheelchair with Marcus Johnson, now a full instructor. "You know what I remember most about that first day?" Marcus asked, adjusting his new instructor's badge. "Not the tools or the techniques. It was how you looked at me like my grades didn't define me, like you saw something else." "Just like my father taught me," Joe replied, touching the wheelchair's worn armrest. "He said a good mechanic sees what something can be, not just what it is right now." The sound of laughter drew their attention to where Thomas Chen was sharing stories with the graduates, his own journey from immigrant mechanic to business leader resonating with their dreams. The wheelchair that had brought him to Joe's shop that rainy morning had become more than just a preserved artifact. It was a symbol of how simple acts of kindness could spark extraordinary changes. As the evening wound down, Joe watched the newest class of students touring the facility, their eyes bright with possibility. The crisis that had threatened to derail them had instead made them stronger, more intentional about their mission. Every student now had both a technical mentor and a community elder, ensuring that along with modern skills, they inherited the values that had built this place. The wheelchair caught the setting sun, its chrome surfaces reflecting the light like promises kept, dreams fulfilled, and new journeys yet to begin. The acquisition offer sat unopened on Joe's desk, its expensive cream-colored envelope bearing the logo of National Auto Training Centers, Inc. Even without reading it, he knew what it contained. Sarah Chen had warned him it was coming after. Their program had been featured in Technical Education Monthly. $15 million, Rosa said quietly, having already opened her copy. Plus ongoing consulting fees and a seat on their National Advisory Board. Joe stared at the envelope, thinking about how his father would have reacted to such an offer. The national chain promised to replicate their success across the country, turning the Martinez method into a standardized training program for thousands of students. They're not just offering money, Rosa continued, reading deeper into the proposal. They want to make this a model for technical education reform. Your ideas about community integration, the mentorship pairing system, the flexible qualification standards, they want to implement it nationwide. Through his office window, Joe watched Marcus guiding a new student through her first diagnostic session. The girl had been ready to drop out of high school before finding their program. Now she was thriving, her grades improving alongside her mechanical skills. The foundation's position, Joe asked, though he suspected he knew. Sarah called. This morning, they'll support whatever decision you make, but Rosa hesitated. They think the offer aligns with their mission of scaling successful community programs. The door chimed, and Mrs. Thompson walked in, leading a small group of senior citizens for their weekly Modern Cars for Classic Drivers session. Their laughter mixed with the sounds of wrenches and engines from the shop floor, the perfect harmony of community Joe had always dreamed of creating. There's more, Rosa said, pulling out another document. National Auto wants to standardize everything. Class sizes, acceptance criteria, payment plans. They say it's necessary for consistent quality control across locations. Joe finally picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. The amount they were offering could fund dozens of scholarships, upgrade all their equipment, expand their community programs. But standardization meant losing the flexibility to make exceptions, to see potential where others might miss it. What about the existing staff? He asked, thinking of Marcus, of Maria Gonzalez, of all the people they'd hired based on character and community connection rather than conventional qualifications. Rosa's silence was answer enough. Corporate efficiency would require corporate standards. The Martinez method would become a trademark, a marketing tool, stripped of the very human elements that made it work. They want an answer by the end of the month, she said, before the next training cycle begins. Joe stood up, walking to his father's old toolbox. Inside, past the well-worn wrenches and sockets, lay a folded piece of paper he'd never shown anyone. It was his father's last note to him, written from the hospital. Remember, hijo, we fix more than machines. We fix futures. Don't let anyone tell you there's only one way to do that. The acquisition offer seemed to grow heavier in his hands. National Auto's vision of nationwide implementation was seductive. The chance to help thousands instead of dozens. But as he watched another group of students gather for afternoon training, he saw what the corporate executives couldn't quantify: the relationships, the trust, the individual attention that made their program more than just vocational education. They'd keep the name, Rosa said softly. The Martinez legacy would reach across the country. Joe turned back to his desk, where decades of ledgers told the real story of that legacy, not in dollars and cents, but in lives changed, one repair, one student, one exception at a time. The true legacy, he replied, isn't in the name. It's in knowing when to say no to money and yes to what matters. The envelope still sat unopened, but Joe's decision was already made. Their success hadn't come from standardization or scalability. It had come from seeing people as individuals, from understanding that sometimes the best mechanics, like the best solutions, came from unexpected places. Outside his office, the sounds of learning, laughter, and life continued. The true measure of his father's legacy, and the one thing no corporate offer could ever replicate. The community petition filled an entire table in the training center's main hall, pages of signatures and personal messages spreading like a testament of trust. "Keep Martinez independent," read the banner above it, hand-painted by Isabella, now one of their youngest instructors. Word of National Auto's offer had spread through the neighborhood like oil through an engine, and the response had been immediate and overwhelming. Current students, graduates, families, and even competing shop owners had added their names to the petition, each signature accompanied by a story of how the Martinez method had touched their lives. "They don't understand what they're trying to buy," William Peterson declared at the emergency community meeting, his weathered hands gripping his walker. "You can't standardize heart." The training center was packed, reminiscent of the crisis meeting months ago. But this time, there was no division, no controversy. The crowd included faces from every chapter of the shop's history. Mrs. Thompson and her now graduated granddaughter, Marcus Johnson, teaching alongside David Weber. Families whose cars had been kept running through decades of payment plans. Thomas Chen sat in his wheelchair near the front, his children flanking him. The acquisition offer had caught the foundation by surprise, though Sarah had admitted later she'd seen it coming. "This was always the risk of success," she'd said. "But it's your decision, Mr. Martinez. The foundation stands with you." Joe stood at the podium, the unopened offer envelope in his hands. "National Auto sees numbers," he began. "They see scalability, profit potential, market expansion, but they don't see what makes this place work." He gestured to Marcus, who was helping. "A new student understand a complex diagnostic reading. They don't see how teaching is about more than following a manual. How sometimes the best mechanics come from giving someone a chance when their grades say otherwise." Mrs. Thompson stood up slowly. "They wouldn't have let me pay in homemade tamales when times were tight," she said, drawing knowing chuckles from the crowd. "They wouldn't have seen the value in that." One by one, people rose to share their stories. The single mother whose career change had been made possible by flexible class schedules. The retired veteran who'd found new purpose teaching basic maintenance to seniors. Each story reinforced what Joe had known in his heart, that their success came from being part of the community, not above it. Rosa stepped forward with the petition, now bearing over 2,000 signatures. "The Chamber of Commerce called," she announced. "They're officially backing our independence. They say we're too valuable as a local institution to lose." Joe finally tore open the envelope, holding up the offer letter. $15 million, he said, letting the number hang in the air. "That's what they think this place is worth, but they're measuring the wrong things." He walked to his father's old toolbox, which had been moved to a place of honor in the training center. "My father taught me that tools are only as good as the hands that hold them and the heart that guides them. You can't franchise that. You can't standardize it. You can only nurture it, one student, one family, one community at a time." Taking the offer letter, Joe slowly tore it in half. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent room. "We're not for sale," he said simply. "Some things are worth more than money." The room erupted in cheers. Thomas Chen wheeled forward, tears in his eyes. "This," he said, gripping Joe's hand, "this is exactly why I brought my children here that morning. You understand what business should really be about, Sarah." Chen stepped up to the podium. "The foundation is doubling its support," she announced, "not to expand nationally, but to deepen our impact right here, because some models work best when they stay true to their roots." As the meeting turned to celebration, Joe watched his community, his extended family, sharing their joy and relief. The petition on the table had become more than just signatures. It was a map of connections, a web of trust built over generations, a promise to keep fixing more than just cars. The new logo gleamed on the training center's wall, a masterpiece of integration. The original Martinez auto and general repair wrench intertwined with modern diagnostic symbols, while the classic "Everyone Welcome" script formed a foundation beneath. But it was the small addition at the bottom that meant the most to Joe. Est, 1962, Community Strong. A group of state educators moved through the facility, taking notes and asking questions. After their stand against National Auto had made headlines, the Martinez method had caught the attention of education reformers looking for alternatives to traditional vocational training. The key is flexibility, Joe explained, leading them through the main training floor. Every student's path is different, just like every repair is unique. He paused to watch Marcus and David team teaching a class on hybrid systems. Their contrasting styles creating a perfect balance of theory and practice. A wall-mounted screen displayed real-time data from their community impact tracking system. Number of families served, jobs secured, lives changed. But beneath the modern metrics, Joe had made sure to keep the old payment ledgers visible in a glass case, a reminder that success couldn't always be measured in numbers. "Your retention rate is remarkable," noted the head of the state's Technical Education Board, reviewing their statistics, "especially with non-traditional students." "Because we retain more than just students," Rosa interjected, arriving with fresh data. "We retain families, connections, community." She pointed to where Mrs. Thompson's granddaughter was now running the senior education program, teaching elderly residents about modern vehicle features with patients learned from years of family experience. The training center had evolved, but not in the way National Auto had envisioned. Instead of standardizing, they had deepened their roots. The Chen Foundation's increased support had allowed them to expand their community programs, while maintaining their core values. "We're not just training mechanics," Joe said, leading the group to their newest addition, a small business incubator for graduates. "We're building a sustainable ecosystem of support." Through the window, they could see Isabella teaching a group of young girls about engine dynamics, her soapbox derby trophy proudly displayed beside her instructor's certificate. The next generation was already rising, carrying forward the legacy while making it their own. Sarah Chen joined the tour, her corporate polish now tempered by months of working directly with students. "The foundation has learned as much as we've been taught," she admitted, "about how real change happens from the ground up, not the top down." In the main hall, beneath the new logo, a touchscreen display showed a map of influenced lives, graduates who had started their own shops, community programs inspired by their model, lives transformed by their approach. It wasn't the nationwide franchise National Auto had envisioned, but its impact rippled out in deeper, more meaningful ways. Joe touched the new logo gently, feeling the raised letters of "Community Strong" beneath his fingers. They had chosen the design together, staff, students and community members all voting on elements that represented their shared journey. "Your father would be proud," Thomas Chen said softly, having wheeled up beside him. "Not just of what you built, but of what you refused to sacrifice." Looking around at his living legacy, the mix of old and new, tradition and innovation, teaching and learning, Joe understood that their greatest strength had always been knowing exactly who they were. In refusing to become something else, they had become something better, a model of how progress could honor its roots while reaching for the future. The new logo caught the afternoon light, casting a shadow that looked remarkably like his father's. Old shop sign. Some things changed and some things stayed the same. The trick was knowing which was which. The apprentice manual lay open on Joe's desk, its pages filled with more than just technical specifications and repair procedures. Between the diagrams and checklists, generations of instructors had added their own notes, creating a living document. that captured the true spirit of the Martinez method. Remember to look for the story behind the repair, read one margin note in Marcus's handwriting. Sometimes the real problem isn't in the engine. Below it, David had added, check the numbers, but trust your instincts too. Each page carried similar wisdom, transforming a simple training guide into a philosophy of service. Joe watched through his office window as the newest class of apprentices gathered for their morning briefing. Among them was Mrs. Thompson's great-niece, already showing the same determination that had marked her aunt's long relationship with the shop. Beside her stood the son of one of Joe's first payment plan customers, now earning his certification through the scholarship program. The manual's getting full, Rosa observed, setting down the latest community impact report. Might need a second volume soon. The numbers in her report told an impressive story. 97% graduation rate, 85% local retention, and a growing waiting list of businesses eager to hire their graduates. But it was the less quantifiable impacts that made Joe proudest. The generational shifts, the restored dignity, the strengthened community bonds. Maria Gonzalez, now their full-time program director, entered with a stack of new applications. The state wants to know our secret, she said, smiling. They can't understand why our graduates stay in the community instead of chasing bigger salaries in the cities. Joe picked up the manual, feeling the weight of its collected wisdom. Because we teach them that success isn't just about fixing cars, he replied. It's about belonging somewhere, being part of something larger than yourself. Through the windows, he could see Isabella leading an advanced diagnostic class, her teaching style combining her father's practical wisdom with the technical precision she'd learned from Marcus. In the bay next door, David Weber was mentoring a group of adult learners, his patient explanations peppered with stories from his own journey from skeptic to believer. The manual had grown thicker with each graduating class, each new instructor, adding their insights, their experiences, their understanding of what made the Martinez method work. It wasn't just about mechanical knowledge. It was about carrying forward a legacy of compassion, community, and belief in human potential. We're not just training the next generation of mechanics, Joe said, running his hand over the manual's worn cover. We're training the next generation of teachers, mentors, community builders. Rosa nodded toward the front desk, where a former student was working out a payment plan with a young mother, showing the same understanding that had marked Joe's approach for decades. The cycle continued, each generation learning not just how to fix engines, but how to lift people up along the way. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching the community-strong lettering on the wall. In its light, Joe could see his father's vision growing, evolving, strengthening with each new page added to their story. The family photo dominated the entrance hall, impossible to miss. Taken at the training center's first anniversary celebration, it captured not just the Martinez and Chen families, but the entire extended family they'd built together. Students, instructors, community members, and supporters all smiled at the camera, arranged around Joe's father's old toolbox and Thomas Chen's preserved wheelchair, the twin symbols of where their journey had begun. 1 year after refusing national Auto's offer, the Martinez Community Auto Center had become something unique in technical education. Other programs had bigger facilities or fancier equipment, but none could match their graduation rates or community impact. It's like your father always said, Rosa reminded Joe as they prepared for the anniversary celebration. The tools matter, less than the hands that hold them and the heart that guides them. The parking lot was filling up with familiar faces. Mrs. Thompson arrived in her still-running Buick, now maintained by her granddaughter. Marcus and David pulled up in the hybrid they'd rebuilt together, followed by Isabella in her latest soap, Box Derby creation. Even James Weber, once their strongest critic, now served proudly on their community advisory board. Thomas Chen wheeled himself to the front of the gathering crowd, his children standing proudly beside him. 1 year ago, he began, I was just an old man with a broken wheelchair, Today, I'm part of a family that's changing lives, one repair at a time. Joe looked out at the faces before him. 3 generations of students, countless stories of transformation, a community bound together by trust and common purpose. The tools and techniques might evolve, but the core principle remained unchanged. Everyone welcome, everyone valued, everyone given a chance to contribute. "My father built this place with a wrench and a dream," Joe said, his voice carrying across the quiet crowd. "But you, all of you, have built it into something even better, a place where we fix more than just machines. We fix futures." As if in answer, the sound of engines starting filled the air, graduates and students bringing their projects to life, each one representing a story of possibility, of potential recognized and nurtured. The noise rose like a symphony of success, echoing off the walls that had witnessed so many transformations. The family photo caught the morning light, each face telling its own story of the Martinez method. Not just a training program, but a testament to what happens when community, compassion, and commitment come together. A reminder that sometimes the biggest journeys begin with the smallest acts of kindness, like fixing an old man's wheelchair on a rainy morning.